25,000 feet over Germany, the sky looked peaceful from the ground. From the back of a B-17, it looked like a killing ground. In the very tail of one of those flying fortresses, in a cramped metal bubble smaller than a closet, Staff Sergeant Daniel Brooks knelt behind his guns. It was early 1943, another daylight raid, another long line of bombers dragging white contrails across enemy territory. Somewhere beyond that hazy horizon were flak batteries, fighter fields, and men whose job was to make sure he never saw home again. Back there, the noise was different. The roar of the 4 engines was muffled. Instead, the tail vibrated with a constant, bone-deep hum. Frost crawled along the plexiglass like pale vines. The heater never quite reached him. The metal under his knees was so cold it made his joints ache. He wore layers of wool and an electric suit, but his fingers inside the gloves still felt clumsy and slow. Right beside his shoulders, twin 50 caliber machine guns stabbed out into the slipstream, black and indifferent. Through his standard tail gun sight, the view was deceptively calm. Blue sky, a few distant glints from other fortresses in the formation, fading contrails. "Tail here, 6 o'clock clear," Brooks reported into the interphone, his voice sounding small in his own headphones. His official job was simple: guard the rear. In reality, every tail gunner knew the same ugly secret. There were angles behind a B-17 where a fighter could sit almost invisible. A thin slice low and dead astern, just under the tail, where the curve of the fuselage and the limits of the sight left a blind space. If a German pilot timed it right, Brooks might not see him until cannon shells were already on the way. Brooks had decided that wasn't acceptable, because this tail didn't look like the others. Around his head and gun sight, someone had bolted, wired, and taped odd scraps of glass and polished metal, angled plates and broken mirrors catching stray pieces of sky. It looked like a funhouse someone had exploded inside a warplane. Then, in one of those mirrors, something flashed. A tiny, sharp glint in exactly the place a tail gunner was never supposed to see. Low, dead astern, climbing fast. A BF-109 was sliding into the blind spot. Brooks didn't hesitate. He swung the guns ahead of where the fighter was going to be and squeezed the triggers. In the next 3 seconds, that crazy mirror rig would prove it could turn an ordinary pair of tail guns into a 3 times deadlier trap. To understand what Brooks was trying to fix, you have to understand what the B-17 really was in 1943 and what it wasn't. On recruiting posters, it was the Flying Fortress. Artists drew it bristling with guns, a steel porcupine in the sky, spewing fire in every direction. To the men who actually climbed into one on a freezing English morning, it felt a lot less invincible. It was a machine built on a bet. The bet was that if you put enough bombers together in tight formation and gave them enough heavy machine guns, they could protect themselves all the way to the target and back. No fighters needed. Just overlapping arcs of 50 caliber fire and bomber discipline. Brooks sat at the very end of that theory. His world was the tail compartment, a narrow tunnel leading to a small pod just big enough for a man to kneel. He had to crawl backward into it, turn around, and then settle onto a bicycle-style seat. Once he did, he was almost completely cut off from the rest of the crew. Ahead of him were aluminum ribs and wiring. Behind him was nothing but thousands of feet of empty air. From German fighter bases, pilots knew the B-17 silhouette intimately. They knew the arcs of its guns, the way the turrets moved, where the blind spots were. The 6 o'clock position, straight behind, was one of their favorite approaches. A skilled pilot could sit just outside the main line of fire, make small corrections, and use the fortress's big, steady outline as a perfect target for cannon shells. On paper, the tail guns were the answer to that. In practice, the man behind them was fighting physics, weather, and human limits. Up front, some positions had clever computing sites that helped automatically figure out lead. In the tail, things were much more basic. Brooks looked through a simple sight and had to estimate, by instinct and training, how far ahead of a target to aim so that his bullets and the enemy met in the same place at the same time. Now, layer on everything else. The closing speed between a head-on fighter and a bomber might hit 500 miles per hour. Even in a rear attack, the fighter was climbing or closing fast. From the time a speck appeared to the time it filled the sight, Brooks might have a second or two of truly effective firing time. The airplane shook from engine vibration and turbulence. Flak bursts rocked the formation. Frost built up on the plexiglass. His breath fogged the sight if he got too close. And the tracers? Those glowing rounds that everyone imagines as easy aiming tools? They only showed him where he had already been firing, usually just behind the target he needed to hit. Later analysis suggested bomber gunners sometimes fired thousands of rounds for every enemy aircraft they actually brought down. Brooks didn't know the numbers, but he didn't need to. He heard it after every mission. Lots of ammo expended, not many kills. He saw it when damaged fortresses limped home, missing engines or wings, or when they didn't come back at all. Sitting alone in that tail, he started to fixate on one question. If he could somehow see the enemy and his own stream of fire in one place at the same time, could he beat the math that was quietly killing his friends? The idea didn't hit Brooks while he was sketching calmly in a notebook. It slammed into him in the middle of a mission that went bad from the start. It was one of those long-range raids everyone remembered afterward in fragments. Frost on the runway, the smell of exhaust while the engines warmed up, the chaplain's quick words that nobody really heard. The briefing map had shown a line deep into Germany, past the range where friendly fighters could cover them for long. From his tail, Brooks watched the formation build, fortress after fortress sliding into position, their contrails stacking into white ladders, stretching west to east. The sun was bright, the sky deceptively clear. It looked like a parade. Then the call snapped over the interphone. "Bandits, 6 o'clock low, closing fast." His body reacted before his brain did. He twisted in his harness, pressed his face to the sight, and scanned downward. There, dark specks rising through the haze. FW. 190s, coming in exactly the way the training posters warned about. Low, slightly offset, climbing into that thin slice of space where tail gunners struggled to track them. He opened fire. The tail guns hammered, the vibration punching through his arms and chest. Tracers streaked out, bright beads arcing toward the incoming fighters. But through the sight, it was like looking at two different worlds. The fighters in one, his tracers in another. He fired long, searching bursts, trying to walk the stream up, then left, then right. Nothing connected. The first 190 roared past, just outside his cone of fire, and kept coming. A heartbeat later, he saw the results. Cannon shells stitched the formation ahead. One B-17 in the low squadron took hit after hit along the wing route. Flame blossomed. The fortress slid sideways, then down, leaving a trail of smoke and pieces. "Tail, did you get him?" his pilot demanded. Brooks swallowed. "Negative. I I drove him off late. On the way home, he couldn't stop staring at that empty spot in the formation where a bomber should have been. Back on the hardstand, walking past their own aircraft's fresh holes, he felt something heavier than fear: failure. In the debrief hut, under yellow lights and cigarette smoke, the gunnery officer pointed to neat diagrams showing ideal firing arcs and textbook deflection. Brooks barely heard him. All he could think was, as long as I have to look at the enemy, then shift my eyes to see where my bullets went, I'll always be behind. In this war, a little behind meant another crew didn't go home. The solution didn't arrive as a flash of genius. It started with a piece of trash. One gray afternoon, while their fortress was down for maintenance, Brooks wandered through the hangar to get warm. A crew was stripping parts from a damaged B-17, canopy smashed, nose caved in from a rough landing. A mechanic unbolted a cracked cockpit mirror, glanced at the fracture running through the glass, and casually tossed it into a scrap bin. The mirror spun once and caught the light. For a second, Brooks saw three things at once in that reflection: the hangar doors, the mechanic, and the tail of another B-17 parked outside. One surface, multiple angles, two worlds crammed into one. He walked over and picked it up. Periscopes. He'd seen diagrams in training manuals, two mirrors at 45 degrees letting you see over a wall or out of a submarine. He'd heard rumors about remote turrets that used optics and mirrors instead of a gunner sitting directly behind the guns. Somewhere in all of that, a thought clicked. What if I don't move my eyes? What if I move the world into my eyes? He spent the next few days quietly hunting for parts. Broken mirrors that still had usable sections, polished metal scraps from instrument panels, spare brackets, bits of tubing, anything that could hold a small reflector at a precise angle. In the mess hall, he started sketching triangles and lines on the back of old menus, trying to map out where the mirrors would have to sit. When their B-17 was free in the hangar, he crawled into the tail with an armful of junk and started building. One mirror went just above and behind the gun sight, tilted so it picked up the flash of his tracers the instant they left the muzzles. Another was mounted lower, angled down so it showed the area directly beneath the tail, the low 6 approach where fighters loved to hide. A third, off to the side, widened his lateral view and overlapped with the waist gunner's arcs. From outside, it looked ridiculous. A cluster of mirrors and taped brackets around the site like some kind of homemade kaleidoscope. The crew chief peered in and snorted. "What is this, Brooks? A barber shop or a gun position?" Brooks tightened a bolt. "If I can see my bullets and the bandit in the same picture, I don't have to guess anymore. I just correct until they meet." On a short training hop, he knelt in the tail and tracked friendly aircraft and clouds. The reflections were strange at first, tilted, compressed, slightly distorted, but the principle worked. When he tapped a short burst, he could see his tracers hanging in the same reflected view as the target. The funhouse tail might actually be deadly. The only test that mattered now wouldn't be over England. It would be over Germany with people shooting back. The raid that truly tested the mirror rig didn't feel special at the briefing. It just felt long. The red yarn on the map stretched from their base in England, across the North Sea, over the Dutch coast, then deep into central Germany, toward a cluster of factories nobody in the room had heard of before. The navigator wrote down headings, the pilots nodded grimly, and the gunners were reminded, again, to hold their fire until the fighters were in range. Ammo wasn't infinite. By the time Brooks's fortress clawed up to 25,000 feet, the world had shrunk to gray clouds below and blazing blue above. The formation locked into its combat box, each bomber holding station on the others like pieces in a floating jigsaw puzzle. Condensation trailed behind them in long, white scars. In the tail, Brooks checked his circus. He nudged one mirror a few millimeters with a gloved finger, tightened the tape on another bracket, then settled into his seat. Through the main sight, he saw the neat line of bombers behind them. In the lower mirror, he saw a sliver of the world directly under the tail. In the upper one, an empty slice of sky where his tracers would soon appear. Off to the side, another reflection filled in what used to be a blind gap. "Tail to pilot. 6 is clear. Rigs up," he said. "Copy, Brooks. Let's hope that junkyard you bolted back there works," the pilot replied. Flak met them near the target. Black puffs appeared ahead, then suddenly all around, each one a dirty cotton ball with steel teeth. The fortress shuddered as fragments rattled against the skin. The pilot's voice came back, tight. "We're on the bomb run. Straight and level." Straight and level. Exactly how fighters liked their victims. The warning came from another ship first. "Bandits, 6 low, multiple, coming up, coming up." Brooks scanned through his sight, nothing but sky. But in the mirror angled under the tail, there, tiny glints sliding into the exact slice of space that had haunted him since that lost fortress went down. 2, maybe 3 fighters climbing into position. He didn't have to twist his neck or guess. He already had them in view. 2 at 6 low, closing fast, he snapped, coming right into us. He tapped the triggers. A short burst cracked out. In the upper mirror, the tracers appeared like a glowing rope, hanging in the same reflected scene as the fighters. No more shifting his eyes from target to bullets. Enemy and fire were finally in the same frame. He nudged the guns a fraction to the right and squeezed again, this time a full, hard burst. The tail shook. Brass casings clattered around his knees. In the mirror, the tracer stream walked forward, intersecting the lead fighter's climb. The BF-109 swelled in his sight, then jerked as pieces flew off its wing. Smoke gushed from the engine. The fighter rolled violently, dropping out of the attack like someone had kicked its legs out. The second German, lining up behind him, suddenly found himself flying through a lethal wall of .50 caliber fire, meant for his wingman. He broke hard, dumping his attack and diving away rather than press into that buzzing curtain. "Tail to pilot. 109 going down, second broke off," Brooks called, breathless. He eased off the triggers. His ammo counter showed far fewer rounds than he was used to spending for a single defense pass. But this time, he hadn't just scared anyone, he'd stopped them. In 3 seconds, the funhouse tail had paid for every hour he'd spent digging in scrap bins. On the ground, the mirror rig stopped being a punchline. In the debriefing hut, under dim bulbs and a fog of cigarette smoke, the intel officer went down the line of crews, recording what they'd seen. When it was Brooks's turn, the numbers didn't look normal. 1 confirmed kill, 1 broken attack, and comparatively few rounds fired. "Tail, you're sure about that 109? The officer asked. Pencil paused. "I watched him burn all the way down," Brooks replied. "And the second one didn't want any part of us after that." The officer made a small mark next to Brooks's name. Nothing dramatic, just an asterisk. But word got around faster than pencil scratches. Out on the hard stand, when the paperwork was done, and the coffee was cooling in tin mugs, other tail gunners wandered over just to take a look. They clustered behind the fortress as Brooks ducked into the tail and pointed out each mirror. "This top one," he said, tapping it with a gloved finger, "is your tracer stream. You fire, you see it right here. This one down low, that's your underbelly. That's where they like to sneak in. And this side piece, it closes the gap to the waist guns. You don't have to hunt. You just keep nudging until the tracers and the bandits share the same reflection." Some laughed and said it would never pass inspection. Others didn't laugh at all. They knelt, squinted through the sight, and quietly started doing the geometry in their heads. Within a week, here and there across the squadron, odd bits of mirror and polished scrap began appearing in other tails. Each rig was a little different, different angles, different mounts, but they all chased the same idea. None of it was official. There were no technical orders, no factory kits. Higher up, the Air Force was already thinking about better turrets, better sights, longer range escorts. Down at the squadron level, a few men were just trying to tilt the odds in their favor with whatever they could bolt to the airplane. By the time his tour was nearly over, the mirror rig wasn't an experiment to Brooks anymore. It was just part of his workspace, no different from the ammo cans at his knees or the dents in the floor where crews had rushed through for dozens of missions. His combat log, if you laid it out, told a quiet story. A handful of confirmed kills, several probables, enemy attacks broken off before they could press home. What stood out, at least to the gunnery officer who bothered to notice, was the ammo count. Fewer rounds fired per claim than most. Cleaner fights, shorter bursts, but there were no medals for creative improvisation with scrap glass. Official records listed him as a tail gunner, missions completed, crew positions held. Not a word about mirrors. When his tour ended, he went home like thousands of others, on a transport ship or crowded aircraft, duffel bag in hand, war in the rear view. Somewhere in an English scrap yard, his old B-17 was eventually broken up. The funhouse tale went with it. Stories like Brooks's mirror rig remind us that World War II wasn't just decided by famous generals, wonder weapons, or big headlines. It was also shaped by cold, cramped corners of airplanes, by one man with numb fingers, a box of scrap parts, and an idea that seemed a little crazy until it worked. Today, there's no official technical order for Brooks's mirror sight. You won't find a blueprint in a museum display case. What survives are the patterns. Field mods, frontline hacks, tiny changes that quietly shifted survival odds. What you've heard here is rooted in real aircraft, real tactics, and real gunnery data. But some dialogue, thoughts, and small details are dramatized to bring the story to life. For serious research, always go to professional historians and archival sources. If you want more forgotten World War II stories like this, help keep them alive. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've heard of any other crazy frontline inventions that deserve their own episode.